like it is now, it's hard to find employees in the nonprofit sector. So those are some highlights from the first chapter that I would emphasize to you to take note of and take a look at, and maybe in more depth. As far as the topic for this week, I started off with a quote, which comes from Tom Friedman in his first book, The World is Flat. He has also written a book, World is Flat, Hot, and Crowded, which I highly recommend, talking about the impacts of globalization. But the idea of whether you're the gazelle or the lion, or the hunter or the hunted, you better get on the treadmill and engage in this new world, because you're going to be one of those. Chapter 3 really gets into explaining what nonprofits are, the fact that they're kind of the incubators in our society. They're like the glue in communities that hold us together. And it's something very unique about American culture which has now taken place all over the world, but we have had this philanthropic charitable organization structure, which if you look at the Ted Pilata TED Talk, you will see goes back to the days of the Pilgrims in a lot of ways. But we've been a gap filler. We've done what government couldn't or didn't want to do. It's been an economic challenge because as I am constantly trying to translate this world for banks and financial institutions, we operate kind of opposite. It's kind of like looking in a mirror in a way where it's not so much that goods equal things equals products. It's like we're creating intangible benefits that, yes, those quality of life things that you can't measure in terms of a bottom line. Supply demand equals buying and consuming versus we're creating external benefits, impacts on community, on society. Many of the great movements in our society were started by small groups of people who organized themselves in nonprofit organizations. And so now, though, however, as we try to bridge this gap and become more business-like to deal with these modern forces, we are blurring these lines a little bit and heading towards social entrepreneurship, which we will tackle in a later session. At the same time, the reasons for giving somewhat remaining the same, but also changing as globalization has enabled the younger generation to donate from their iPhone across the globe, compared to the traditional ways of which people gave money as outlined in the text. The other concept that I like in this chapter is the concept of the commons theory, that nonprofits create a safe space for expression and actions, a place where people can try to do something to improve their community or their neighborhood, and as a result develop a whole new service. Bottom line is there are many theories behind the sector and also many benefits. Corporate culture is a concept I wanted to highlight this week, which talks about the way values take shape in behaviors, get embodied in people, and I'll come back to chapter 7, create the means by which value systems are created in organizations. Chapter 7 focuses on strategy, and I put that here because I think that's where we need to start in terms of how these organizations make a difference. They're visionary, they're incremental, they're analytical. These are the different approaches that we can take and that do take shape in nonprofit organizations. These organizations link strategy and implementation. It's nice to be a critical thinker, critical strategic thinker, but what I spend most of my time doing is actually trying to implement, which is a whole nother piece of this. because it involves process and product, it involves being integrated, it involves being visionary and detailed. And so the model I like to use is the Bryson model, which combines this mission, these values, a SWOT analysis, strategic issues, and objectives. The Macmillan Strategies Matrix is also a good one, but I'm going to focus on Bryson in a second. The last thing I would say is, remember that strategic planning is not leadership. That's the guide, that's the tool of leadership. So planning, right now, we are being impacted by new futures where technology has completely changed the way we have to look at things, because it challenges our value systems because it operates opposite of that corporate culture paradigm I presented earlier. And it's not so much that value-shaped behavior, but now because we have new kinds of behaviors, it's challenged our whole value system of how we operate it. So something like in vitro fertilization, where you can make babies in test tubes, we don't have religious or legal ethics, values that even can begin to deal with that. And so it's kind of turning things upside down, but we faced that before in the after the Industrial Revolution, when society had new capacities and had to deal with all of that. So it's why we feel like things are in flux. They are, because we have all these newfound capacities. So here's the Bryson strategic planning model visually, which I really like, because as you can see, it puts mandates and the types of things at the top of this chart are the exterior forces, the political, economic, which give you the external environment scenarios. This is a combination of scenario planning and SWOT planning, which creates opportunities and threats. These are the mandates, the things you have to do, and at the bottom is the internal, the mission and values, the people, the resources you have, the way you function, your results, your history, your mission. These are the shoulds. So and these shoulds point the way to strengths and weaknesses, and when you combine those, you end up with your strategic directions. So what I always like to say is you match an external opportunity with an internal strength, and 9 times out of 10 you will be successful. And that's what leads to the strategic directions that you want to take on. This is a little example of my own strategic planning process. Remember what I said earlier, we don't have a bottom line of whether you made money or not. So you have to have something else that holds the organization together. So the way I have done it is to play out this implementation, as I said earlier, of a strategic plan that starts with the board revisioning how they see the mission and setting out some broad goals, and then that gets interpreted at different levels of the organization, department level, program level, and in actual individual performance plans. So when you take an organization like mine, where I have 7 departments, 40 programs, 500 individuals, when each of those are doing 3 or 4 goals, you end up with 2,000 goals that in some way relate back to the mission. So at the end of that, even if you only accomplish 10% of those, you're bound to be successful. This is just a simple goal planning sheet, which I'm sure you have seen or used in your organizations. And finally, the concept of mission, that all of this gets held together by mission. And mission, as Drucker says, the terms I pick out of these that I really like, it focuses on what the institution tries to do. It needs to be specific, simple, and clear. So my mission is a little wordy. I'm not all that enamored with it, but what I usually use when I'm talking to people is our tagline, which is family strength is community strength. It's kind of like talking about mom and apple pie when you say that. There's a lot that can relate to it. John Bryson views it as a vision of success. So you may not be doing it now or accomplishing it, but it's a vision of success in the future. And finally, John Carver, which is the one I really like, is how will the world be different as a result of what you're doing? So now the world may be defined demographically, geographically, in terms of an issue, but this is one that I always try to keep in mind. Why are we doing this that will make a difference in the lives of people, in the lives of a community, in the lives of society? So this week you're working on your mission statement, and I hope this slide, as well as some of the other information, gives you a little bit to think about in that regard.